For generations, the American dream followed a familiar timeline. Graduate from school, land your first real job, save up for a down payment, and buy a small starter home before turning 30. It was almost a rite of passage, the moment when young adults officially stepped into stability and independence. But something dramatic has changed in America's housing market, and the numbers reveal just how severe the shift has become. In 2000, the share of first-time homebuyers fell to roughly 21%, one of the lowest levels ever recorded, while the typical age of someone buying their first home has climbed to around 40 years old. That means millions of young Americans who expected to own a home in their 20s or early 30s are now waiting nearly a decade longer than previous generations just to get their foot in the door. Behind those statistics is a story unfolding across cities from California to Florida, where rising home prices, mortgage rates hovering around historic highs compared with the pandemic era, and a deep shortage of affordable housing have combined to create one of the toughest markets young buyers have faced in decades. In fact, recent housing research suggests that nearly 3/4 of Americans under 30 cannot afford to buy a home in the city where they currently live, forcing many to delay life milestones, move back with family, or relocate entirely in search of affordability. What was once considered the most reliable path to building wealth in the United States, owning a home, is increasingly becoming out of reach for the very generation expected to carry the economy forward. But here's the part that rarely makes headlines. While the national housing crisis affects the entire country, the pressure isn't evenly distributed. In some American cities, the gap between incomes and home prices has grown so extreme that even young professionals earning solid salaries are finding themselves locked out of the market entirely. Across the United States, the struggle to buy a home isn't just about high prices anymore. It's about the widening gap between what young professionals earn and what homes actually cost in the cities where the jobs are. Over the past decade, home prices in many metro areas have risen dramatically faster than wages, creating a situation where even households with stable incomes find themselves unable to qualify for mortgages large enough to compete in today's housing market. Mortgage rates that surged after the pandemic-era housing boom only intensified the problem, pushing monthly payments hundreds or even thousands of dollars higher than they were just a few years ago. For young Americans trying to enter the market for the first time, that shift has turned what was once a challenging milestone into something that now feels almost unattainable in certain cities. Economists often measure housing affordability by comparing median home prices with median household income, and in several major American cities, that ratio has climbed to levels historically associated with severe housing stress. In simple terms, the typical home now costs many multiples of what the typical young household earns in a year. Even diligent savers who have managed to accumulate a down payment often discover that the monthly mortgage payments, property taxes, insurance, and maintenance costs push total housing expenses far beyond what lenders consider safe borrowing limits. This financial squeeze is forcing many younger buyers to delay purchasing decisions or expand their search to entirely different regions of the country. But the cities we're about to explore reveal something even more telling about today's housing landscape. These are places where economic opportunity continues to attract young professionals. Yet the housing market has evolved so rapidly that ownership is increasingly limited to older, wealthier buyers or those who already have significant equity from previous homes. What's happening in San Jose might seem like a unique problem tied to the technology industry, but the reality is that similar patterns are emerging in other fast-growing American cities. Over the past decade, several metropolitan areas have experienced a surge in population. As companies expanded, remote workers relocated, and younger professionals chased new career opportunities. At first, that growth brought excitement and economic momentum. New restaurants opened, downtown districts revived, and job markets strengthened. But housing construction in many of these places simply failed to keep up with demand. As a result, prices began climbing faster and faster until younger buyers found themselves facing a market that looked dramatically different from the one their parents had entered decades earlier. The next city reveals how quickly a once affordable market can transform into one of the toughest places for young buyers to gain a foothold. Austin, Texas. Not long ago, Austin was widely considered one of the best cities in America for young professionals hoping to buy their first home. The city's vibrant music scene, growing technology sector, and relatively moderate housing costs made it a magnet for workers moving from more expensive coastal regions. Companies from across the country began establishing offices there, and an influx of high-earning remote workers accelerated the city's economic expansion. For a time, the promise of Austin seemed simple, a thriving job market combined with housing prices that still felt reachable for younger buyers. But the rapid population growth that fueled Austin's success also created enormous pressure on the local housing market. During the pandemic housing boom, home prices in the Austin metropolitan area surged at one of the fastest rates in the country. In some neighborhoods, Property values climbed more than 50% within just a few years. Nashville has spent the past decade transforming itself from a regional cultural hub into one of the most dynamic growth centers in the American South. Known worldwide for its music industry and vibrant entertainment scene, the city has also become a powerful magnet for businesses and young professionals seeking new opportunities. Major corporations have expanded their presence in the region. Healthcare and technology sectors have grown rapidly, and thousands of workers have moved to Nashville in search of both career advancement and a high quality of life. But just like Austin, Nashville's popularity has brought unintended consequences to its housing market. As more people arrived, the demand for homes began rising faster than the available supply. Builders attempted to keep pace with new developments across the metro area, yet construction often struggled to match the speed of population growth. Over time, the imbalance between supply and demand pushed home prices steadily higher. For younger Americans entering the workforce in Nashville today, the shift is noticeable. Homes that once served as affordable starter properties are increasingly out of reach for first-time buyers. In many neighborhoods close to the city center, prices have risen so significantly that young professionals now find themselves competing for a shrinking number of homes within their financial range. Even when buyers manage to save for a down payment, the higher borrowing costs created by rising mortgage rates can quickly stretch monthly budgets. By this point, a clear pattern is beginning to emerge. The housing crisis facing young Americans isn't confined to a single region or industry. It's spreading across multiple parts of the country, affecting cities that once promised opportunity and upward mobility. Economists often describe housing markets as a balance between supply and demand, but in many fast-growing metropolitan areas, that balance has been broken for years. Population growth surged, job markets expanded, and migration accelerated, yet housing construction lagged behind. Over time, that imbalance quietly transformed what used to be attainable starter markets into places where the financial barrier to entry grows higher every year. For younger buyers, the challenge isn't just the price of the home itself, it's the entire financial equation. Higher mortgage rates mean buyers must qualify for larger monthly payments. Insurance costs have risen in many parts of the country. Property taxes continue climbing as home values increase. When all of these factors combine, the total cost of owning a home in some cities has reached levels that were almost unimaginable a decade ago. The next city on this list illustrates exactly how extreme that shift can become. Los Angeles, California. Few housing markets in America capture the affordability crisis more clearly than Los Angeles. For generations, Southern California symbolized opportunity, a place where ambitious young people could move, work hard, and eventually carve out a life that included owning a home. But over the past 2 decades, housing prices in Los Angeles have climbed so dramatically that the city has become one of the most difficult places in the country for young Americans to buy property. Today, the median home price in the Los Angeles metropolitan area has climbed well into the high hundreds of thousands of dollars, often approaching or exceeding the $1 million mark in many neighborhoods. For younger workers just beginning their careers, by now, one reality is impossible to ignore. The struggle young Americans face in buying their first home isn't simply the result of expensive coastal real estate anymore. It has evolved into a national affordability crisis, stretching from the Pacific Northwest to the Sunbelt and across some of the most economically vibrant cities in the country. Over the last decade, housing prices in many metropolitan areas rose far faster than wages, while mortgage rates increased sharply after the pandemic housing boom. The result is a financial squeeze that is reshaping how younger generations think about stability, wealth, and where they choose to build their lives. For many millennials and members of Gen Z, homeownership was supposed to be the foundation of long-term financial security. In previous generations, buying a home allowed families to build equity, accumulate wealth, and create stability for decades. But in several American cities today, that pathway has become significantly harder to access, even for younger workers with solid careers. The final cities on this list reveal just how widespread that challenge has become. Miami, Florida. Over the past few years, Miami has experienced one of the most dramatic housing transformations in the United States. Once known for offering relatively affordable living, compared with other major coastal cities, Miami has rapidly evolved into one of the country's most expensive housing markets. A surge of new residents, including remote workers, entrepreneurs, and investors, relocating from higher tax states, triggered an intense wave of housing demand that pushed home prices sharply upward. For young professionals already living in the city, the pace of that change has been difficult to keep up with. Home prices climbed significantly in a short period of time, while rising mortgage rates increased monthly payments even further. Tampa has become one of the fastest-growing housing markets in the southeastern United States. But that rapid growth has brought its own challenges. The region's expanding job market, relatively lower taxes, and appealing coastal lifestyle have drawn thousands of new residents in recent years. As demand surged, housing inventory struggled to keep pace, and prices rose accordingly. For younger Americans moving to Tampa with the hope of buying their first home, the situation can be surprising. A city once viewed as an affordable alternative to other coastal markets now presents financial hurdles that many first-time buyers must carefully navigate. Higher mortgage rates have compounded the issue, increasing monthly payments and reducing purchasing power for buyers entering the market. Some younger residents are responding by looking farther outside the city, searching for homes in smaller surrounding communities, where prices remain somewhat lower. Others are choosing to rent longer while waiting for market conditions to stabilize. The result is a housing landscape where the timeline for homeownership continues to stretch further into the future. Boston, Massachusetts, the final city on this list, highlights how even long-established economic centers are experiencing the same pressures affecting newer growth markets. Boston has one of the most educated workforces in the country, supported by world-renowned universities, healthcare institutions, and technology companies. For young professionals graduating from these institutions, the city often represents the beginning of promising careers. Yet Boston's housing market has become one of the most expensive in the United States. Limited land availability, strict development regulations, and consistently strong demand have pushed home prices steadily upward for years. Even smaller starter homes or condominiums can carry price tags that challenge the budgets of first-time buyers. When you step back and look at these 10 cities together, a powerful story about America's housing market begins to take shape. In many of the country's most dynamic economic centers, the path to homeownership is becoming longer, more expensive, and more uncertain for younger generations. The combination of rising home prices, higher borrowing costs, and limited housing supply has created a financial landscape very different from the one previous generations faced when they bought their first homes. This shift doesn't necessarily mean the American dream of homeownership has disappeared, but it does mean the timeline for achieving that dream is changing. Many young Americans are adapting by saving longer, relocating to more affordable regions, or rethinking what their first home might look like. At the same time, economists and policymakers are paying close attention to these trends. Housing affordability plays a major role in economic mobility, community stability, and long-term wealth creation. As cities continue to grow and evolve, the challenge of making housing accessible for the next generation will remain one of the most important issues shaping the future of the American economy. For millions of young Americans today, the dream of owning a home is still very much alive. But in these 10 cities, turning that dream into reality has become one of the toughest financial challenges of their generation.